On that cold, wet, and foggy night of April 18, 1775, American silversmith Paul Revere mounted his steed, ready to ride. Atop his trusty horse, he traveled village to village and door to door, while on his midnight ride shouting, "The British are coming. Prepare for war." When the smoke cleared at Concord, Bunker Hill, and Yorktown, too, many patriots had paid the ultimate price defending our red, white, and blue. Our Declaration of Independence set all Americans free and made the United States of America the land of liberty. Our country marched forward with 13 states and continued to grow with a few mistakes. Then came June 1st, 1812. It seemed such a shame. A second war for independence was said to blame. In 1836, history tells us of Houston, Bowie, Crockett, and Boone. 2 centuries later, their courage at the Alamo will not be forgotten soon. Against the mighty Santa Anna's army, over 4,000 strong, 200 courageous Texians fought for independence 13 days long. Outnumbered by tenfold, these fallen heroes asked for our trust, and then one by one gave up their lives for the rest of us. We're all a part of what occurred at this little Texas mission. This act of bravery is now a part of an American tradition. Then time marches on, and the Industrial Revolution begins, with farms, factories, trains, and even cotton gins. Ruthless men forged empires from this virgin land at the expense of the Plains bison and the American Indian. On April 12, 1861, guns a-blazing at Fort Sumter before morning sun, pitting the South against the North, and the Civil War had begun. President Lincoln on one side, General Lee on the other, cousin fighting cousin, and brother fighting brother. The time had come for the black man to be set free, yet over a century and a half later, we're still far from harmony. The American Old West was only 25 years in duration. Folklore and legends born add to the history of our nation. Wyatt Earp, Pat Garrett, Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and Billy the Kid. Good guys chasing bad guys. That's what these guys did. The Victorian era and the turn of the century came next, with Teddy's famous Rough Riders preserved in text. Mark Twain coined the Gilded Age was here to stay, while beautiful maidens adorned in satin and lace seen every day. Statuesque ladies and top-hatted gents dressed ever so neat, romantically holding hands and strolling down every town's main street. America seemed to be so peaceful and calm until the headlines read Lusitania hit by a bomb. America had fought from its own shore to shore, but sadly, this was its first real world war. The global conflict ended and smoke finally cleared. The Roaring Twenties arrived and all America cheered. Speakeasies, the Cotton Club, Al Jolson, Elliot Ness, and Al Capone, Tunney, Valentino, and of course, the Babe Ruth on the throne. Our country went on with all of its daily chores, never forgetting those devastating wars. Prosperity reigned and all looked well. That is, until the day came when Wall Street fell. Chaos and confusion are running the banks. Millionaires to paupers and thousands fell through the ranks. Torn, tattered, and bruised, America came through, now stronger than ever and still proud too. But on that 7th day of December in 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked and World War II had begun. Eisenhower, MacArthur, and Patton were America's fury unfurled. Hitler's genocidal killing of 6 million Jews shocked the entire world. American soldiers have courage, pride, and honor, don't you see? They would even give up their lives to keep other countries free. Men on the front lines and ladies building ships, planes, and tanks. It's the greatest generation for whom we all owe our thanks. Most will never forget that solemn day of August 6, 1945. High in the clouds, the Enola Gay carried the atom bomb inside. This heart-wrenching decision was made by our President Harry S. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan were the targets, and we all know the rest. Throughout the world, the 38th parallel was known by so few. Yet our brave young men lost their lives in Korea too. The invention of the jet engine gave our Air Force a thrill, but 243 courageous American soldiers died on Pork Chop Hill. The baby boomer and bonanza decade of the 50s came and went. Names like Chuck, Ricky, Fats, Buddy, Bo, and Elvis cast in cement. The Bop, Hully Gully, Bristol Stomp, the Twist and the Stroll made famous the teenage sensation called rock and roll. The 60s were filled with violence in the streets, anti-war demonstrations and flower children's streets. It was certainly a time of doubt, confusion, and unrest, with Timothy Leary, the Beatles, and of course, the Rabbit Test. Our President John F. Kennedy, his brother Bobby, and Martin Luther King all had a dream. They were lost to us forever in one silent scream. Camelot was over when these leaders died. America was shaken, and all throughout the world cried. Vietnam was the war that wasn't a war, yet it killed and maimed our soldiers score by score. They returned home with no parades and no cheers, forced to cope all alone with their own private tears. Since the space age began in the 50s in May, Americans have waited for that very special day. Collins, Aldrin, and Armstrong left on Apollo 11, leaving the Earth's gravitational pull toward what we call heaven. The Eagle has landed, and the people of planet Earth began to unwind. Armstrong said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The 70s came in with things hard to handle, President Nixon's resignation and the Watergate scandal. Gerald Ford was appointed president because he could do no harm. And then Jimmy Carter was elected president of a peanut farm. Only in the land called America could all of this take place, with the blessed help of our Lord and His saving grace. The movie star Governor Ronald Reagan then stepped in. Conservative media loved him, with his sense of humor and famous grin. Despite most of the mainstream media's doubts, he set a challenging goal. As president, he restored pride in America, like diamonds from coal. The 1980s also saw many forms of greed and corruption, junk bonds, inflation, and the savings and loan destruction. Then President George H.W. Bush stepped into Reagan's shoes. Americans thought, well, not a bad guy, what do we have to lose? His vision? 1,000 points of light from California to D.C., symbolizing unity of all Americans. But could it really be? On January of 1991, Scuds flew, and Operation Desert Storm hit the ground. General Schwarzkopf, smart missiles, and ironclad tanks were all around. American military might moved swiftly on Saddam's army with pride. Hussein's famous elite Republican Guard had nowhere to hide. The Gulf War ended a mere 6 months after it had begun. Mothers and fathers elated with the return of daughter and son. Do you recall that President Jimmy Carter was elected off a peanut farm? The 20th century ended with President Bill Clinton's great deal of charm. Then dot-commers became dot-bombers overnight, it seemed. Their fortunes were lost as though it had all been a very bad dream. Another George Bush in the White House, many were glad. Ironically, it was something as innocuous as a hanging chad. No words could ever describe the horrific and catastrophic events of 9/11. But we know all those innocent souls now reside peacefully in heaven. The curse of the Bambino began its reign after the 1918 World Series year, something Red Sox fans became accustomed to shedding an annual tear. Never had a pennant contender come back from 3 down. But in 2004, Boston sent the Yankees' evil empire tumbling to the ground. President Ronald Reagan was lost to us in the 2004 year. Republicans, independents, and even a Democrat or two shed a tear. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina collided with America's Gulf Coast. $25 billion in damage, but loss of life hurt the most. Our most costly natural catastrophe of all. But it doesn't end there. The real story was the generosity of fellow man and all those who care. The assassination attempt failed to silence His Eminence, dearly beloved. But in 2006, the good Lord saw fit to summon Pope John Paul II to heaven above. The Pilgrim of Peace was seen by more people around the world than ever before. A statesman, actor, poet, humanitarian, world leader, and much more. President Obama was Martin Luther King's dream come true. The American flag unites our people with its glorious red, white, and blue. While liberals stand proud and conservatives shout, "Where's the beef?" Well, we can all agree on one thing, that Bernie Madoff is a scoundrel and a thief. The Tea Party, made famous in Boston Harbor in 1773, rose up again in 2009, demanding once again we be set free. Deepwater Horizon was a sight to behold and a drilling platform to boast. That is for all the oil executives, but not so much for the local inhabitants down on the Gulf Coast. Thick Texas tea, black gold, and sticky crude oil spewing out of the sea, damaging our fragile environment, was a gigantic oil company called BP. On May 2nd, 2011, Blackhawks had the guarded Abbottabad compound in sight, culminating a global manhunt with our courageous Navy SEALs ready for the fight. Closure never occurs for those families of their 9/11 loved ones viciously stricken down, but a decade later, we were all relieved when Osama bin Laden lay dead on the ground. Four Americans and Ambassador Stevens were murdered in Benghazi one night. Our men were told to stand down, but 6 heroes came to rescue and to the firefight. By not confronting reality and taking the fight to ISIS on their home turf, inevitably, radical Islamic ideology will fester and manifest much worse. Political pundits and presidential tracking polls tried to manipulate the call. Businessman Donald Trump said he'll have Mexico pay for a big, beautiful wall. He'll make America great again, using his experience and the art of the deal. He intends to serve the highest office in the land with vigor, zest, and zeal. With GDP performance at all-time lows and an economy in the tank, it's about time we have a new president outside the swamp to thank. On the 18th day of March 2020, the U.S. economy was booming like never before. Then, COVID-19 global pandemic arrived, said to take 100,000 U.S. lives and more. Small businesses were shut down, and families were devastated from state to state. Great Depression unemployment was dwarfed to 40 million. By the June 1st date, Americans shouted, "Open the doors so our livelihood and loved ones can survive." What good is a cure if our families are sheltered, starved, depressed, and deprived? Entrepreneurial business owners revolted and refused to comply with draconian law. Politicians and puppet dictators forced to accept people had reached the final last straw. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights was written by those willing to fight to be free. Back and forth bickering between members of Congress must stop, don't you agree? Our founding fathers warned not to take our eyes off the safety and security ball because they knew the first obligation of our government is to protect and serve all. With ruthless villains, anarchy, terrorism, and worldwide turmoil abound, we still must remember the kind and caring acts of so many around. Like the 200 strangers that attended the funeral of a homeless vet, people every day give and donate much to those in need they never met. Our military defends life, liberty, and freedom wherever it may be. We give thanks and God bless America from sea to shining sea. With all of our accomplishments, we still have a long way to go. We need to feed, shelter, and care for our people. Isn't that so? Cures for cancer, muscular dystrophy, and autism must be found. And let's not forget all the other afflictions and diseases that abound. We are a strong, determined, and exceptional people, while some say, "It ain't so." Well, just ask the millions around the world who flee oppression if they know. America is the bright light of hope, opportunity, and the land of the free. People of all races and cultures long to stand beneath our statue of liberty. Most on the far left, mainstream media, Hollywood, and the university elite castigate capitalism, patriotism, religion, and the common folks of Main Street. But as all of us common folks know, no matter what the critics might say, the greatest place on earth to live free is still the good old US of A. In closing, remember and never forget, the future holds many surprises. But even with all the anxiety and the uncertainty that it comprises, if we fail to learn from our past, we could make the same mistakes again, but this time, they could be our last. Thank you, and God bless America.